Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 7th of March, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. Things are always changing around different parts of Alaska at different times, and if you don't have a good way to stay up to date with the weather, things could change very quickly and surprise you. Of course, we don't want that to happen. So weather.gov/Alaska is a great way to find your first stop for getting TV maps that you want to check out. The marine maps, aviation maps are all there this evening, and they'll be there until very early tomorrow morning before we start adding new ones throughout the day. And you can find your way to more up-to-date information as you go through the daytime there. The morning is a great time to check for the latest forecast. Take a look at the satellite and radar pictures, or just bookmark your zone forecast or your marine area so that you can stay up to date and very quickly find that information that is critical for your village or perhaps your road trip north or south. You can give us a call at 1-800-472-0391. Send us an email at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. If you can't find what you're looking for, we'll be happy to help zone you in on exactly what you need. Here's a look at southeast now, and we still have a few advisories posted there for the White Pass region. A wind chill advisory is in effect, and that'll go through Friday morning. So a long time we're expecting this to last. It could feel as cold as 30 to 45 below if you're traveling through White Pass. You're going to want to make sure you've got your extra layers on, and of course if you step out for a second or get stuck, you're going to make sure you've got some extra layers and ways to stay warm in your car just in case something happens. Always a better idea to be prepared, right? This kind of cold is pretty significant, of course, and if you're not prepared for that, your flesh can freeze in 30 minutes or less in that kind of a situation. So potential for wind chill values as cold as 30 to 45 below for the White Pass area through Friday morning. Now down south, this is a winter weather advisory, and in this region we're expecting another 1 to 5 inches of snow on top of what you already have. This is going to include the southern inner channels and the southern outer coast. That'll go all the way until tonight through Thursday midday. So expect the snow to slowly taper off. Most of it will come down this evening and early tomorrow morning. So winter weather advisory for the southern sections of southeastern Alaska. Now, if you look very carefully, you'll notice some orange around the Valdez area. That's for Thompson Pass, of course. That's a high wind watch, and we're expecting the winds to come up tonight. And stay with us as we head into Thursday morning. It looks like that'll probably bring some gusts about 50 to 60 miles per hour, some of those as strong as 75. So not only will wind chill be a problem, but also some strong and gusty winds. So be careful if you've got plans to travel through Thompson Pass, starting tonight, going all the way through most of the day on Thursday. Let's take a look up north because we're not done yet. The Chukchi Coast also under a high wind watch. So we're going to have some strong gusts going through that region. It looks like we'll see some southerlies about 50 to 60 miles per hour sustained with gusts to 75 there as well. Of course, that is going to drive the wind chill values down and could decrease visibility on top of that. So a high wind watch posted for tonight and into early Friday for the Chukchi Coast, especially around Wainwright down toward Point Hope. So be prepared for that. Here's a look at the satellite picture, and you can see we're still in that same old pattern. We've got a low pressure system across the eastern Gulf of Alaska and notably right over southern southeast. A wide area of high pressure expansive across the mainland, and then low pressure is trying to work its way into the western side of that more stable and pretty cold air mass across the mainland. As we go, things are pretty slow to move across the west. Each one of these waves is trying to chip its way into the west part of Alaska, very stable and very tough, resolute dome of cold air. Low pressure is just sitting on the outside of that here across the eastern Gulf, really not doing much. It's not got any reason to move, so it sits and spins and will slowly drop to the south and east. But in the meantime, we're dealing with cold, and that cold wants to fill the vacuum of low pressure across southern southeast, so it's pushing wind across the northern sections of southeast. It's pushing wind across and through Thompson Pass and down Cook Inlet and through Shelikof Strait and all the little nooks and crannies as that air is rushing from a very dense volume here across the interior to what is a vacuum here across southern sections of southeast. So not a whole lot to talk about as far as precipitation goes today across the mainland. Sure, there's a couple brief rounds of snow across the western capes at times and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, but mostly clear and dry, which means if you're a Northern Lights chaser, you're probably going to have a good time and probably have some extra company out there in the hot spots around your favorite part of Alaska. Low pressure sitting in southern southeast today at 999 millibars. A stationary boundary drapes its way across the eastern Gulf and the northern Gulf up through the Kenai Peninsula. And then here's our big ridge, 1,040 to about 1,039 millibars or so, give or take, across the Yukon Valley all the way across the southwest. You can see what we're looking at here looks like clouds. This is ice, in fact. We can see that easily on the satellite picture today. And another wave of low pressure working its way up across the western chain, a little bit of light rain there, all the way out at Attu, and some snow across Wales. Tonight's forecast brings a front across the western Bering Sea. That low pressure system at 986 millibars will bring rain and snow showers up across the western Bering into the Gulf of Anadyr. Light snow showers around the St. Matthew Island region, as well as blowing snow north of Nunivak Island into the Bering Strait. Clouds, but not really a great chance of any precipitation there through the Bering Strait region. Might see some snow showers across the Beaufort Seacoast and just offshore. The concentration for any sizable amounts of precipitation is what we were talking about a minute ago with that winter weather advisory. Southern southeast, looking at another opportunity for 1 to 5 inches of additional snow on top of what you already had. Everywhere else, cold and windy and dry. That will continue for most of the mainland. Look at this. Really didn't have to draw in a whole lot of clouds today across the mainland at all. High pressure still in charge across the eastern interior, up around Eagle, 1,046 millibars as we get into Wednesday afternoon. Low pressure sitting across the Queen Charlotte's and Haida Gwaii region. Snow showers across the central and eastern Gulf. And slowly and surely, the opportunity for snow will sink to the south and east. Not much going on across southwest, just cold. A ridge of high pressure firmly in control there across Norton Sound as well. Unalakleet just cold and dry. Low pressure out across the west at 994 millibars, drawing in that southerly wind. So you know it's warming up out here, but it's not moving east just yet because high pressure is still in charge of the mainland here. By Thursday, we see the high is up to that magic number of 1,050 millibars there. So if you're flying around toward the end of the week, places like Eagle and Tok and all your favorite haunts up and down the Alcan border, we expect to see at least a couple spots that reach that mystery point where the altimeter settings are going to be really critical to pay attention to. So be extra careful if you're flying as we get into Wednesday night and Thursday. 1,044 millibars there across the lower and middle Yukon Valley, starting to grab some of that warm air here across the west and push that across the north. Now the result of that is going to be snow, but the fact that warmer air is moving up and over this starts to tell me that the pattern's changing just a little bit, maybe breaking down just a bit. So we'll have to see what happens as we get into Thursday and Friday and how this high pressure system kind of reorganizes itself a little bit more. In the meantime, southeast starts to clear out a little bit. Snow showers are moving out to sea. And we still have our boundary out across the west that can't really budge its way eastward, but it's still trying. So let's look at Thursday. We'll see what happens as we get into Friday tomorrow. Temperature-wise today, teens and 20s for most of southeast. The lower sections of southeast under snow are hovering around the lower 30s like Ketchikan and Annette, 30 in Hyder. Teens and 20s for most of Prince William Sound. Cordova was 22, 25 in Homer today. Kenai in the teens, 16 for Anchorage, 26 in Talkeetna. And Fairbanks, 6 below today with a 1 above in Eagle, 2 below around Tok and northward. Fort Yukon, 1 above. 9 below in Anaktuvuk Pass if you're headed that way today. 5 to 15 below across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. 8 below in Barrow. 11 below as you head down toward Cape Lisburn, Point Hope, and in Kotzebue Sound. Anywhere from 10 to 20 below almost in Kivalina. 6 below in Nome. This is at the 3 o'clock hour. 0 around Unalakleet. 1 below in Galena. 2 above in Bethel, Lake Iliamna in the single digits today. Teens and 20s for most of the peninsula and the Aleutian Chain region. 34 for Cold Bay. 30 in St. Paul. Low to mid 40s for Adak and Atka, 40 around Shemya this afternoon. Here's a look at overnight lows, and we're looking at temps anywhere from 20 to about 40 below across the central and eastern interior, including the middle Tanana Valley. The north slope 15 to 30 below. Southwest, look for temperatures anywhere from 5 to 10 below, 6 below in Nome, 2 above in Nunivak Island, about 4 below in King Salmon, 21 above in Kodiak. Teens and 20s for the Alaska Peninsula, 27 in St. Paul. Adak, 39. Southeast, teens and 20s for most areas. Haines, you're looking at about 9 degrees overnight with a high of 16 tomorrow. Southeast, look for temps in the teens and 20s for high temperatures. Your warmest places again, Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock. 24 around Yakutat, upper 20s for Prince William Sound, the Cook Inlet region in the teens and 20s again tomorrow. Kodiak 31, 3 in Fairbanks, 5 below at Fort Yukon. Galena and the Ruby area, single digits once again, so cold stuff there, as well as most of the coastal areas of Norton Sound. 14 in Unalakleet, 16 in Nome, 9 in Kotzebue, and 2 in Barrow for your daytime tomorrow. On to flying weather. Well, if you're trying to get through some of the big passes, visibility and ceiling should be A-OK. Look for southeast and see some MVFR in the southern southeast in the morning and out across the chain, St. Paul, St. George. Attu looking at IFR to start, and as well as some of the northern Arctic coast still hovering with MVFR through most of the day. Southeast should see some gradual improvements in the southern part of the Panhandle, and we'll continue with MVFR creeping eastward toward Dutch Harbor and Alaska as we go through the day. IFR still hovering right over Attu. Pass conditions, well, you could do this with me, right? Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, VFR there, all the way around the Horn for the Alaska Range. Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass all look to be visual throughout the daytime tomorrow. Might be a little cold and blustery at times. Mentasta Pass, VFR, Tonita Pass, VFR, and Portage Pass looking good there at VFR. Chilkoot and White Pass, VFR. Not too often you see that one, except inside winter, right? The surface freezing line right there around the Dixon entrance, and then shoots all the way over toward the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and then just to about the Gulf of Anadyr. The warm air is trying to work its way northward, but don't forget, high pressure is still in charge, and that's exactly what you see here on this freezing level map. Icing potential across the Chukchi coast, isolated across areas below 8,000 feet, across the northern and eastern Gulf above 2,000 feet, and that's going to be right where we're seeing some of that snowfall through early tomorrow morning across southern southeast. Elsewhere, hit and miss out across the central and western Bering Sea. Here's our jet stream, and boy, if you looked at the surface charts, you could probably draw on this yourself as well. That upside down U-shaped pattern we see, that omega, is that blocking pattern. Remember, if you like football, this is a great way to think about it. This is the linebacker here, and it's holding the action back from the bearing, moving anywhere else eastward. So, well, that works. 60 to 75 knots coming from the north, and then due west, moving eastward into the western parts of Canada, and then across the western sections of the Bering and the Kamchatka Peninsula, all the way out into eastern Asia. 150 knots coming in. A lot of that energy, though, is dropping southward and then picking itself back up with a lot of Pacific moisture, slamming the Pacific Northwest this week again. So active weather there. High pressure across the Bering. Northerlies in charge of the west coast, anywhere from 20 to 40 knots. Northerlies also working down the central and eastern interior over south central, and then wrapping into the low pressure across southeastern Alaska. Winds there not too terrible, 10 to 20 knots around that low pressure system. Southerlies across the Aleutians, much stronger at 3,000 feet, winds up to 70 knots across the western chain. High pressure still in charge here as well. You get north and westerlies coming in across the north slope, north winds draining out across Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, and Cook Inlet, 20 to 30 knots there. And north and easterly winds wrapping into low pressure across southeast. Wind speeds still somewhat light there, about 10 to 15 in most areas over the Gulf. Here's turbulence below 6,000 feet for many in northern parts of southeast across the northern Gulf. The Cook Inlet region could be blustery at times, especially where the winds are converging below 6,000 feet. Don't be surprised for occasional moderate. And out across the western chain along that surface boundary and aloft below 4,000 feet and across the northwest coast. A little bit of chop there expected throughout the day. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'm back with the rest of your marine maps here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
One of the major challenges facing us is how to shield astronauts from radiation. Research tells us that some metals are good shields, but weight will be a major consideration. For example, in order to keep within weight limits, only thin skins could be applied to a craft, which will allow too much radiation into living quarters. But adding thick layers of radiation blocking material could make the craft much too heavy. An added concern is, Once the atoms inside the metal's skin are hit by incoming particles, they would bounce around like billiard balls, causing secondary particle shedding, which could in fact be as dangerous to crews as the original radiation. One solution currently being discussed is the use of hydrogen-rich plastic such as polyethylene, which is the same material found in garbage bags. Hydrogen is a good radiation-blocking element, and some hydrogen-rich plastics can be formed into lightweight, strong shields that are about 10 times stronger than aluminum. This is just one of the innovative designs that are currently being reviewed for use in space.
The whole goal in the long run is to have our astronaut crews be as healthy as possible throughout the entire mission. Not just survive the mission, but be as healthy and thrive during the mission.
Another tool researchers are using to help monitor radiation is something called the phantom torso. This is a simulated human torso that houses real bones and plastic organs that measure the amount of radiation to which an astronaut is exposed while in space. Let's go back out to Tonya, who spoke with Dr. Francis Cucinato, NASA's chief scientist for radiation research.
In most science fiction films, threats to space travelers usually deal with aliens, asteroids, and a host of other menaces. But in reality, one of the biggest threats to space travelers is in fact radiation. That's why it's imperative that NASA researchers focus on finding ways to shield astronauts from exposure. I spoke with Dr. Francis Cucinato at NASA Johnson Space Center to find out more.
Shielding, one of the things you should think about is that you don't have to shield the entire spacecraft, that you can shield just portions of a spacecraft where you could locate astronauts during a solar storm. The solar storms last from 1 to 2 days, but the peak of the radiation is only over about an 8-hour time frame. So you can save a lot of cost at launching mass by locating the astronauts in one place within a spaceship or a habitat on the moon or Mars. And then in that localized region we can have extra shielding, and there we can also use better materials. So the materials like aluminum are a typical spacecraft material. They're very sturdy, easy to use, but they're not the best materials for shielding. So in these localized areas of a spacecraft, we would plan on using a material with a lot of hydrogen in it. So hydrogen turns out to be the best material for stopping ions as they pass through the material.
Can you explain how radiation will affect the astronauts?
One of the things that's important when you look at radiation effects is that it's a game of risks. So like any other risk, like driving your car or taking an airplane flight. So you really have to stop and say, well, is it worth it to take the risk? So when you look at that question, there's two things that come to mind. One is, what am I doing? So you think, well, I'm going to discover life on Mars, so it's obvious that you will take risks. So you'll accept the risk from radiation. But the other part of the coin is, what is the risk? Because now NASA or the families of an astronaut, they want to know what the risk is, and some of the astronauts too want to know what the risk is. On a space shuttle mission, the risks from radiation are very small. So even if we're off in our predictions by a lot, there's really no outcome to that, or bad outcome. When you go to the moon or to Mars, we know that the risk from radiation is going up. So now the point is that the accuracy of our prediction becomes more and more important as the risk is expected to get higher and higher. This is the basic physics and understanding of these processes has been developed along with the knowledge from us understanding space radiation effects.
What are some of the preventative measures you're taking for astronaut safety?
We're looking into ways to prevent radiation effects through countermeasures. And the key to countermeasures is knowledge. So if we look again at this problem of going from genetic damage or tissue damage to late effects like cancer, we believe that the way you can prevent this is understanding the whole problem from top to bottom, and then looking for an opportunity to intervene and prevent the cancer from growing. So that this has obvious benefits on Earth. One area we're interested in is that it turns out that the ends of chromosomes, which are called telomeres, if they're lost through a radiation event, the deletion of the telomere, that this is one of the mechanisms that causes cancer. So we're looking now at mechanisms that you could use with the drugs or other biological countermeasure, biochemical methods to prevent the loss of the telomere from radiation. But telomere loss is not only occurring with radiation damage, it's also occurring from cigarette smoking and poor diet. So there's a whole bunch of other areas where protection of telomere damage it would be applicable on Earth.
How do you not get frustrated dealing with so many unknowns in your research?
Well, that's the most fun part of the job, is that you're doing something that's unknown, it's new, so it's sort of like discovering, a voyage of discovery, like going into space, that you're trying to look at what's really happening to people when they're exposed to radiation at the very most basic level. You have to really go down to DNA, the physical interactions of radiation with DNA, and how DNA, when it's changed, leads to disease. So these are really basic science questions, and we've come to understanding that that's the only way we really can protect the astronauts, because if you use a method that's empirical, meaning there's a lot of assumptions and things that you really don't know, but you'll just skip over that you can actually make very life-threatening mistakes in the end. So you really need to go to this very basic approach and understand the whole problem from top to bottom.
That's it for this episode of NASA's Destination Tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. I'm Steele McGonigal.
And I'm Kara O'Brien. For all of us here at NASA, we'll see you next time.
Here's a look at the sea ice edge, and as measured today, the edge was about 70 to 90 nautical miles to the north and east of St. Paul. We've got southerlies out across the west, but we've still got the northerlies coming down the coast, so kind of mitigating each other there. So continue to watch for some ice growth with those northerlies bringing the cold down to the south. We're also watching the ice concentration in Cook Inlet. That's still south of Kenai and Clam Gulch there, so keep your eyes on that. You can check this out anytime at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice, as well as many other maps that tell you a lot more information that are customizable to your situation. You can zoom in, zoom out, and then check the concentration and the thickness, which both are very critical, as well as the 5-day forecast that's included there. Here's a look at southeast. We're going to be talking about north and northeasterly winds over the next couple days, 25 to 30 knots in the central and southern interchannels, 40 knots out of the northern Lynn Canal, with 10-foot seas and a risk of freezing spray. So watch yourself if you're moving in the north. Northeasterlies blowing offshore all the way from Yakutat to Craig, 20 to 35 knots there, with seas ranging between 5 and 7 feet on Thursday. Northerlies continue in the inner channels on Thursday, 35 knots up north. That diminishes just a bit, 30 knots across the central and southern inner channels, 6 to 8 foot seas there, and 6 to 8 foot seas across the outer coast. Still looking at mainly a north and easterly flow, more easterly though coming out of the Dixon entrance, 25 knots with a 6-foot sea on Thursday. For south central, northerlies over Cook Inlet and the ice up north, 15 knots there, 20 knots a little bit further south, becoming northwesterly west of the Barrens. 30 knots with a 10-foot sea should do the trick, with heavy freezing spray at times. Northerlies across Shelikof Strait, and 25 to 30 knots across the north and western Gulf. 9-foot seas east of Kodiak Island, 6-foot seas outside of Prince William Sound, and 4-foot seas on the inside on that northerly wind. For Thursday, the winds diminish a little bit, 15 to 20 knots, still looking at a north and easterly wind around the western Gulf, and 15 to 30 knots coming down Cook Inlet west of the Barrens, up to 30 knots with an 11-foot sea, 10-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait. Bristol Bay, you're looking at northerly winds at 20 knots tomorrow. As you get down the Bering Sea coast, easterlies will take over at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. North and easterly winds across the Pacific coast, 7 to 8 foot seas there, with a 20 to 25 knot wind for Wednesday, becoming 20 knots on Thursday for the Pacific coast in its entirety. Northeasterlies with a 5 to 6 foot sea there, and 5 foot seas down the Bering coast with northeasterlies through Bristol Bay as well on your Thursday. For the Aleutians, north and easterly winds will shut down. We'll start talking about southeasterlies for most of the central and eastern chain. 15 knots south of Nikolsky and Unalaska with 7-foot seas there, 35 to 40 knots out west with 13 to 18-foot seas as you go through Wednesday afternoon. As we get into Thursday, the winds diminish there a little bit more. South and easterly winds take over, 25 to 30 with 13 to 14-foot seas, 5 to 8-foot seas across the Bering coast, 6 to 12-foot seas across the Pacific coast, and winds there anywhere from 15 to 25 knots, generally from the east and southeast. For the west coast, still looking at those offshore winds, 25 to 15 knots down on the south. 12-foot seas around St. Matthew, over the open waters there around St. Paul and St. George, 20 knots with an 18-foot sea from the south and east. Thursday, easterlies 25, 13-foot seas for the Pribilofs, southerlies over St. Matthew Island, 14-foot seas in the open waters. And again, watching for freezing spray, east and southeasterly winds up the west coast, 10 to 25 knots, increasing as you go northward toward the Bering Strait. Across the Beaufort Seacoast, south and easterly winds will continue 10 knots and fairly light there, but watch out for much stronger winds as you get up around Cape Lisburn and Point Hope. Remember, we're talking about a high wind watch in this area, and that would be why. Considerably stronger flow once you get north of the Seward Peninsula. As we get into Thursday, that should start to improve, but it will be a blustery period there as you go from Wednesday into Thursday. 25 to 35 knots, 30 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound, and 25-knot winds pick up from the south and west across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. So plan on wind chills dropping and winds picking up as we get into Wednesday and Thursday for especially areas along the Chukchi coast. Tonight's forecast includes that high wind watch up north. That will continue until Friday morning for the Chukchi coast there. As we get into southern southeast, a winter weather advisory is in effect there, looking for an additional 1 to 5 inches on top of what you've already had. That will start to diminish as we get into tomorrow morning, so conditions improving there. Also watching for a wind chill advisory. We issue those when the feels like index, that apparent temperature on your skin, gets pretty severe, and in this case it could be as cold as 30 to 45 below, which means your flesh could freeze in under 30 minutes there. If you're traveling through White Pass, be prepared, especially if you're traveling alone. Make sure you've got some extra supplies to stay warm. And a high wind watch posted for the Thompson Pass area. Also looking for some strong and gusty winds to develop tonight and into tomorrow. Their gusts to 75 miles per hour are possible. Looks like a fairly dry rest of the week for most of the mainland. Certainly windy and cold around the periphery of that high. Thanks for watching. See you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.